A hot, relentless wind whipped dust devils across the cracked asphalt of a forgotten New Mexico highway, painting the bleak landscape in shades of sun-bleached ochre and faded rust. Along this desolate ribbon of road, a lone figure trudged forward, shoulders slumped, head cast down, each step kicking up miniature clouds that clung briefly to his worn boot tips before dispersing into the vast, indifferent air. He was a silhouette against the immense, unforgiving sky, a stark testament to a life stripped bare. Every crease etched on his weather-beaten face told a story of hardship, of promises broken, and trust shattered. This was Jake Turner, a name that once commanded respect in the rodeo circuit, a man whose hands knew the reins of a wild bronc better than they knew the feel of pavement. Now, those same hands, calloused and strong, clutched at the frayed edges of a tattered denim jacket, offering little warmth against the chill that seemed to seep not from the air, but from deep within his bones. He was a cowboy without a ranch, a wanderer without a home, his entire world having crumbled beneath the weight of a betrayal so profound it had left him not just penniless, but soul-sick. The memory of her face, twisted in deceit, still burned like a brand, extinguishing any remnants of hope he might occasionally glimpse. She had taken everything, his savings, his property, his very identity, leaving him with nothing but the dust of his past clinging to his boots and the bitter taste of abandonment in his mouth. His journey had become an aimless odyssey, each mile a physical manifestation of his internal exile. He'd known better days, days filled with the thunder of hooves, the roar of the crowd, and the quiet satisfaction of a hard day's work under an honest sky. But those days were ghosts now, haunting the edges of his consciousness, making his present reality all the more crushing. He'd tried to pick himself up, to find honest work, but the shadow of his ruin seemed to follow him, a constant companion. Every door seemed to slam shut, every opportunity vanished like a mirage in the desert heat. He'd slept under stars that once felt like old friends, now just distant, mocking pinpricks of light. Hunger was a dull ache that had become a familiar companion, almost comforting in its predictability, compared to the sharp pangs of loneliness and regret. There was no plan, no destination, just an incessant forward movement, driven by a primal urge to simply keep going, even when every fiber of his being screamed for respite, for an end to the endless road. The feeling of having nowhere to go, no one to turn to, was a cold, suffocating blanket that wrapped itself around him, tightening its grip with every passing hour. He was adrift in a world that had seemingly forgotten him, a ghost of his former self, wandering beneath the vast, indifferent expanse of the New Mexico sky. His life had become a tapestry, woven with threads of despair, each knot a memory of what he had lost. His dreams, once vibrant and clear, were now faded echoes, barely discernible against the harsh backdrop of his reality. The sun beat down, intensifying the shimmering heat on the horizon, but offered no warmth to the chill in his soul. He was a man lost, truly and utterly lost, in the expansive, unforgiving wilderness of his own broken life. Please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell for more compelling stories. The sun beat down relentlessly, a merciless orange orb in the vast, unforgiving New Mexico sky. Jake's boots, once sturdy and reliable, were now little more than sun-baked leather husks, offering scant protection against the scorching earth. Each step was a testament to his sheer will, a defiance of the hunger gnawing at his gut and the persistent ache in his bones. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of walking, hoping, and finding nothing but more dust-choked roads leading to nowhere. He'd learned to ration his meager supplies, a half-empty water bottle and a few stale crackers, stretching them far beyond their intended limits. The loneliness was perhaps the heaviest burden, a silent companion that whispered doubts into his weary mind, reminding him of every wrong turn, every false promise, every face that had turned away. He was a ghost in the landscape, a forgotten echo of a life that once held purpose and pride. Nights offered little respite. The desert air, though cooler, carried with it the haunting cries of coyotes, a mournful symphony that mirrored his own inner turmoil. He'd shiver, not always from the cold, but from the raw vulnerability of his situation. His makeshift bed, a patch of hard ground beneath a sparse juniper, provided no comfort, only a stark reminder of how far he had fallen. Rock bottom wasn't a metaphor. It was the sharp, unforgiving gravel beneath his aching back, the empty expanse of stars mocking his insignificance. He remembered the crisp sheets of his ranch bed, the scent of fresh coffee in the morning, the robust feel of a horse beneath him. Those memories, once a solace, now felt like cruel taunts, highlighting the chasm between his past and present. Hope was a flickering candle in a hurricane, threatening to extinguish with every gust of despair. It was in this abyss of desolation, amidst the swirling dust and the silence of his own fading existence, that the unexpected arrived. He'd stopped by a dilapidated gas station, one of those forgotten outposts clinging to the edge of civilization, hoping for a discarded newspaper or a moment of shade. The elderly proprietor, a woman with a face etched by years of desert wind, called his name, her voice raspy. "Are you Jake Turner?" she asked, holding out a tattered, official-looking envelope. Jake's initial reaction was a surge of suspicion. Who would be looking for him? He hadn't heard from anyone in years, not since the betrayal that had stripped him bare. He expected a bill, a summons, anything but good news. His fingers trembled as he took the envelope, the paper feeling unnervingly substantial. Inside, the words swam before his eyes, a bewildering jumble of legal jargon and monetary figures. Estate of Robert Turner, $5 million, cattle ranch, sole beneficiary. $5 million. The numbers seemed to mock his empty pockets, his worn-out clothes. It had to be a cruel joke, another trap. His father, Robert Turner, had been estranged from him for decades, a relationship scarred by unspoken resentments and an abrupt, unexplained departure from Jake's life during his formative years. The idea of his father leaving him anything, let alone a fortune and a ranch, felt utterly impossible, a twisted fantasy designed to poke fun at his present misery. He scoured the letter, searching for the catch, the fine print that would reveal the malicious intent, the cruel hand behind this elaborate prank. His heart, long dormant, began to pound with a frantic rhythm, a chaotic mix of disbelief, a flicker of something that resembled hope, and a deep-seated distrust that urged him to dismiss it all as an elaborate, painful illusion. The crumpled, ink-stained letter, initially dismissed as another cruel joke from his past, now lay before Jake, a stark testament to unbelievable fortune. He'd trudged into the dusty, flickering, fluorescent light of a roadside diner, its air thick with the smell of stale coffee and desperation, just to use their phone. The crackling line had connected him to a stern-voiced attorney in Santa Fe, a man named Sterling, whose formal tone brooked no nonsense. Sterling didn't mince words. The inheritance, improbable as it seemed, was indeed real. A substantial sum, yes, but more importantly, a ranch. Not just any ranch, but the Turner family's ancestral lands, sprawling across $5 million worth of New Mexico desert. Jake's mind reeled as the attorney detailed the vast acreage, the natural springs, and the dilapidated but structurally sound main house. It was the same ranch his father, Elias Turner, had painstakingly built and fiercely guarded, the very place Jake had fled years ago, convinced his father hated him. Sterling's voice, devoid of emotion, continued to lay out the specifics. The will, ironclad and recently unearthed after a meticulous search by the family lawyer, outlined every detail. Elias, a man of few words and profound stubbornness, had left everything to his only son, Jake. This revelation was a punch to Jake's gut, stirring a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. His father, the man who had seemed to disown him, had secretly held onto hope, had kept his son in his final thoughts. Jake remembered the scorching arguments, the unspoken disappointments, the chasm that had grown between them until it felt impassable. Yet, here was proof that beneath the gruff exterior, a connection had endured. The ranch wasn't just land and property, it was Elias's legacy, a testament to his life's work, now unexpectedly thrust upon Jake, the prodigal son. But the inheritance held another, far more profound emotional weight. Amongst the legal jargon and property descriptions, Sterling mentioned a specific clause. "And my faithful companion, Old Blue, to be cared for by my son." Old Blue. The name echoed in Jake's memory, a phantom whisper from a childhood long buried under layers of hurt and resentment. Old Blue wasn't a person, and certainly not a pet dog. Old Blue was his father's horse, a magnificent, loyal quarter horse, as reliable as the sunrise, with eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the high desert. Jake remembered riding Old Blue as a boy, clinging to his father's strong back, the rhythmic sway of the horse a lullaby. Old Blue had been his father's shadow, his confidant, perhaps even more than Jake himself had ever been. The thought of Old Blue, still alive and waiting for him, struck a chord deeper than any monetary value. It was a thread connecting him to a past he'd tried so desperately to forget, a living, breathing piece of his history. The attorney, sensing Jake's stunned silence, offered terse instructions for travel and contact information for the ranch's interim caretaker, a distant cousin named Martha. He then promptly disconnected, leaving Jake alone with the weight of this impossible news. The $5 million ranch, his father's legacy, and Old Blue. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was a ghost from his past, a challenge from beyond the grave, an unexpected tether to a family, and a life he thought he'd irrevocably lost. The road-weary drifter, accustomed to the anonymous solace of the open highway, suddenly had a destination, a purpose, and a gnawing sense of responsibility he hadn't felt in years. He had to go back, he had to see it, to understand it, to face the memories, and most importantly, he had to find Old Blue. The bus ride was a blur of dusty landscapes and fragmented thoughts, each mile bringing Jake closer to a past he'd both yearned for and dreaded. He clutched the faded photograph of his father, a younger, sterner Elias, standing proudly beside a majestic quarter horse. Old Blue. The image was a potent mix of nostalgia and apprehension, a silent promise of what awaited him. Days blended into nights as he traversed the vast expanse of the country, the rhythm of the road a familiar companion, yet now imbued with an unfamiliar sense of purpose. Every passing town, every fleeting glimpse of distant mesas, felt like a step back in time, unraveling the years of his self-imposed exile. He was no longer just a wanderer. He was a man returning home, albeit to a home he barely recognized. The journey was an internal one as much as a physical one, forcing him to confront the ghost of his estranged father and the boy he once was. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bus deposited him on a gravel road, miles from anywhere. The air was dry, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. He began walking, the worn leather of his boots kicking up clouds of red dust, his meager belongings slung over his shoulder. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple when he first saw it. Through the shimmering heat haze, a cluster of dilapidated structures slowly materialized on the horizon. The ranch. It wasn't the grand, pristine image he held from his fragmented childhood memories. This was a testament to neglect, a ghost ranch. As he drew closer, the full scope of its abandonment became painfully clear. The once sturdy fences leaned precariously, their barbed wire rusted and broken in places. The main house, proud and imposing in his memory, now stood with peeling paint, several windows boarded up, and a general air of weary surrender. Overgrown weeds choked the pathways that once led to vibrant gardens. The corrals were empty, gates hanging askew on broken hinges, and the barn, once a bustling hub of activity, looked like a skeletal monument to a bygone era. A deep sigh escaped Jake's lips, a mix of profound sadness and something akin to awe. It was far worse than he had imagined, yet still, it was undeniably his. A strange cocktail of emotions churned within him. There was the heavy weight of sorrow for what his father had lost, for the neglect that had befallen this once thriving place. But beneath that, a flicker of something else, a defiant spark of connection, of belonging. This was Elias Turner's legacy, rough and broken as it was, and it was now his. He felt the overwhelming task ahead of him, a mountain of work stretching out into the unforgiving landscape. Restore this place? It seemed impossible. Yet, as he stood there, the last rays of sunlight painting the neglected buildings in a melancholic glow, he felt a strange pull. It wasn't just dirt and decaying wood. It was history, memory, a forgotten piece of himself. The stillness of the evening was broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote, sounds that were both alien and deeply familiar. He closed his eyes, inhaling the dust and the scent of neglect, and for the first time in years, he felt a faint tremor of purpose. His father's ranch, once a source of bitter memories, now presented itself as a daunting yet undeniable new beginning. He had nowhere else to go, and nowhere else he truly wanted to be. The journey had ended, and another, far more challenging one, was just about to begin. Arriving at the ranch, a whirlwind of dust and memories, Jake had barely shed the grime of the road when a low, almost mournful whinny drifted from the dilapidated barn. It was a sound that snagged at the frayed edges of his heart, pulling him toward the familiar, weathered structure. The hinges groaned a rusty protest as he pushed open the main door, revealing a cavernous interior where shafts of sunlight struggled through gaps in the tin roof, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale air. And there, in a stall near the far end, stood a horse. Old Blue. He was older, of course, his once sleek coat now flecked with gray around the muzzle and eyes, a testament to years that had passed. But the eyes themselves, deep and intelligent, held the same wisdom Jake remembered, the same gentle spirit. Jake approached slowly, his steps echoing in the quiet space. He reached out a hesitant hand, palm open, and Old Blue, after a moment of careful observation, lowered his head, nudging his nose softly into Jake's palm. It wasn't just a touch. It was a recognition, a tangible connection across the years and the pain. A quiet understanding passed between them, a wordless communication that spoke of shared histories and enduring loyalty. In that instant, the weight of the inheritance, the ranch, everything, coalesced into a singular, profound emotion. Old Blue remembered him, and Jake, in turn, remembered a part of himself he thought was long gone. Yet, as potent as that moment was, it couldn't fully obscure the overwhelming truth of the ranch's decay. Beyond the barn, the main house, once a proud sentinel, now sagged, its porch collapsing in places, windows shattered like vacant eyes. Fences, stretching across acres that used to hum with the lowing of cattle, lay broken and splintered, reclaimed by thorny brush. The corrals were crumbling, the water troughs dry and cracked, testament to a long period of neglect. Jake walked the property, the endless expanse of disrepair stretching before him, a monumental task that threatened to swallow him whole. Every twisted beam, every overgrown path, every choked irrigation ditch screamed for attention, for repair, for a hand to guide it back to life. The sheer scale of the work ahead was daunting, a Goliath waiting to be faced, and for a man who had lost everything, it felt almost insurmountable. As he explored, Jake stumbled upon small, poignant remnants of his father's life, like breadcrumbs leading him through a forgotten past. In the dusty workshop, half-finished leather projects lay on a workbench, tools resting beside them, as if Elias had just stepped away for a moment. A faint scent of saddle soap still lingered. In the study, a worn copy of Lonesome Dove sat on a shelf, its pages dog-eared at a particularly heroic passage, a book Jake remembered his father reading by the firelight, his gruff voice softer than usual. Each discovery was a small, quiet whisper from the past, reminding him of a father who, despite their estrangement, had poured his life into this land. These glimpses were like faint stars in the vast, dark sky of his apprehension, small beacons of connection, hinting at a man far more complex, perhaps even more loving, than Jake had allowed himself to remember. The ranch wasn't just physical property. It was a living museum of his father's soul, waiting to be rediscovered, understood, and perhaps, finally, forgiven. Jake's return to the high desert wasn't met with open arms by everyone. As he coaxed his beat-up truck, a relic he'd bought with the last of his emergency cash, down the long, winding dirt road leading to the Turner Ranch, he felt eyes upon him. Not curious glances, but something colder, more appraising. The small town of Redemption, just a few miles from the ranch gate, seemed to hold its breath as he passed through. Faces in windows, figures on porches, all seemed to pause their activities, their expressions unreadable, yet undeniably tinged with an unsettling mixture of suspicion and veiled judgment. He sensed a history here, a narrative he wasn't yet privy to, a story woven into the very fabric of the landscape and its people. It was more than just the usual small-town gossip. There was an undercurrent of something deeper, older, and potentially hostile. He'd stopped at the dusty general store in redemption for supplies, enduring the silence that fell over the few patrons when he walked in. The proprietor, a wiry man with eyes that saw too much, simply nodded, offering no greeting, only a price for the meager groceries Jake selected. The air was thick with unspoken words, with averted gazes that snapped back the moment Jake turned away. He caught fragments of hushed conversations, a name here, a reference there, all circling back to the Turner Ranch and, more obliquely, to his late father. One phrase, barely a whisper from an old woman clutching a worn Bible, prickled his skin. "Some debts ain't never paid." It wasn't directed at him, not explicitly, but the timing felt too deliberate to be coincidental. The unease deepened when he pulled up to the ranch gate. It wasn't padlocked, but a rough, hand-painted sign declared, "No trespassing," in stark, peeling letters. As he wrestled with the rusted chain, a battered pickup truck, much newer and better maintained than his own, idled slowly past, its occupants staring openly. Two burly men, their faces weathered by sun and hard living, didn't offer a wave or a nod, only a prolonged, calculating gaze that lingered long after they'd driven out of sight. They weren't just curious. They seemed to be assessing him, perhaps even issuing a silent challenge. It was a familiar feeling from his past life, the scent of trouble brewing. But this time, it felt deeply personal, connected directly to his heritage. Later, while attempting to repair a section of broken fence near the property boundary, Jake overheard more. Two riders, seemingly traversing an adjacent property, paused just out of clear sight. Their voices, carried on the dry desert wind, were low, but distinct enough for Jake to pick out key phrases. "Turner's back. Thought he'd never show his face. That land ain't worth the trouble. Still got that old man's blood in him." The comments were loaded, implying a shared memory, a collective grievance against his family. His father, Elias, had been a formidable, unyielding man, and it was clear his presence still cast a long shadow over the community. Jake's return wasn't just about inheriting a ranch, it was about stepping into a history of unresolved conflicts, land disputes, and deep-seated resentments that had simmered for years, waiting for someone to reignite them. He knew instinctively that rebuilding the ranch would be far more complicated than simply mending fences and patching roofs. He had inherited not just property, but also a legacy of animosity. The immediate problem was water. The old well, a relic of his father's stubborn self-reliance, had gone dry years ago, leaving only a rusted pump handle that groaned uselessly when Jake wrestled with it. The troughs were caked with hardened mud, and the few remaining scrubby plants within the ranch's perimeter withered under the relentless sun. Hauling water by hand from Redemption, even with the modest capacity of his pickup truck, was a Sisyphean task. He needed a proper well, or at least a functioning pipeline, but the equipment required was beyond his current means, and the local contractors he tentatively inquired with seemed surprisingly busy, their schedules suddenly packed, their prices exorbitant. It felt less like bad luck and more like a concerted, unspoken boycott. He tried to fix the ancient tractor, its engine seized solid, parts missing or corroded beyond recognition. Days blurred into a frustrating cycle of tinkering, consulting dusty manuals he found in the barn, and making fruitless trips to the nearest hardware store, an hour's drive away. Each attempt ended in failure, leaving him covered in grease, sweat, and a growing sense of hopelessness. The fences, already dilapidated, continued to crumble, allowing stray cattle from neighboring properties to wander onto his land, further stressing the meager grazing and raising the specter of yet more disputes. He'd spend hours herding them back, a solitary figure under the vast, indifferent sky, his anger a cold, hard knot in his gut. Despite the Sisyphean nature of his tasks, Jake pushed on. He began by clearing the immediate vicinity of the main house and barn, hacking away at the invasive tumbleweeds and thorny bushes that had claimed the yard. He mended what he could with scavenged materials, patching holes in the barn roof with old sheets of tin he found rusting behind the shed, nailing loose boards back onto the porch. It was slow, back-breaking work, often yielding minimal visible progress, yet each small victory, like a freshly mended hinge or a patch of cleared ground, fueled a flicker of determination. He was asserting his presence, one nail, one cleared branch at a time. He wasn't just fixing a ranch, he was trying to mend a life. Through it all, the old horse, whom Jake had finally named Elias after his father, remained his steadfast companion. The horse, with its wise, roomy eyes, seemed to understand Jake's quiet struggles. Elias would often stand near him as Jake worked, a silent, comforting presence, his soft nuzzle against Jake's shoulder, a wordless reassurance. There were moments when Jake, utterly spent, would simply lean against Elias's warm flank, feeling the steady rhythm of the horse's breath, drawing strength from the unspoken bond they shared. It was Elias who led him to a small, hidden spring higher up on the property, a trickle of clear, cool water that, while not enough for the entire ranch, became their personal lifeline for drinking. The horse seemed to possess an instinct, a primal connection to the land that Jake was only just beginning to rediscover. Elias was more than just a symbol. He was a silent partner in this uphill battle, a living embodiment of the past that Jake was trying to reclaim. The animal's unwavering loyalty became a metaphor for the guidance Jake sorely needed, showing him that even in the bleakest moments, ancient wisdom could still lead to new beginnings. The brewing hostility found its focal point a few days later, crystallizing into a direct conflict over the ancient water rights to Bitter Creek. This creek, a meandering thread of life through the arid landscape, skirted the western edge of the Turner Ranch, and its waters were vital for both Jake's inherited land and the sprawling property belonging to the formidable McCready family. The McCready Ranch had been a local powerhouse for generations, their name synonymous with wealth, influence, and a notoriously aggressive approach to land management. Jake had heard whispers about them, of course, during his brief forays into town, hushed warnings, veiled threats, all pointing to a history of legal skirmishes and boundary disputes with Elias Turner. Now he understood why. He was attempting to clear an irrigation ditch clogged with years of neglect and sediment when a heavy-duty pickup truck, emblazoned with the distinctive McCready brand, rumbled to a halt on the dusty track beside him. 3 men emerged, their movements deliberate, their expressions grim. The man in the lead, thick-necked and barrel-chested, radiated an aura of entitlement. This was Jedediah McCready, the current patriarch, his face a roadmap of hard living and harder decisions. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, narrowed as they fixed on Jake. Turner, McCready's voice was a low growl, carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Heard you were back. Heard you were messing with my creek." Jake leaned against his shovel, wiping sweat from his brow with a forearm. "This isn't your creek, McCready. It's Bitter Creek, and these are my irrigation ditches on my land." He gestured vaguely towards the dilapidated but undeniably present remnants of his father's old water system. Jedediah let out a humorless laugh, joined by his two hulking companions. "Your land? Your ditches? That water feeds my cattle, boy. Always has. Your daddy tried this song and dance, too. Didn't end well for him." The implied threat hung heavy in the air, a chilling reminder of the long-standing feud. One of McCrady's men, a younger version of Jedediah with a cruel smirk, stepped forward, kicking at a loose rock near Jake's boots. "Look, I'm just trying to make this ranch productive again," Jake said, keeping his voice even, though a cold anger began to stir within him. "And that means restoring the water flow. My father's deed, which I now hold, clearly outlines the water rights for this property." "Deeds mean nothing when a man's got thirsting cattle, Turner," Jedediah countered, his voice rising, edged with a dangerous intensity. "There's enough water for one, not two, and it's going to be for us." He pointed a thick, calloused finger directly at Jake's chest. "You pack up your things, ride on out. This place ain't for you. It never was." The unspoken weight of decades of animosity pressed down on Jake. This wasn't just about water. It was about pride, about territory, about a legacy of conflict that stretched back further than he could grasp. He looked into McCrady's unyielding eyes and saw not just a challenge, but a complete dismissal of his right to exist on this land. For a fleeting moment, the old despair threatened to resurface, the familiar urge to simply walk away from another losing battle. But then, an image of his father's stoic face, etched into his memory, flashed before him. He thought of the neglected ranch, of the old horse, still waiting for him in the dust-filled corral. He felt the earth beneath his feet, the parched, forgotten soil that was now his. "This is my home now, McCrady," Jake stated, his voice firm, unwavering. He met Jedediah's gaze unflinchingly. "And I won't be leaving. Not for you, not for anyone. My father fought for this land, and I'll do the same. If that means a fight over water, then so be it." He knew, in that precise moment, that he was making a stand, not just for himself, but for Elias Turner's spirit, for every ounce of blood and sweat his father had poured into this unforgiving soil. The ranch wasn't just a collection of decaying buildings and barren fields. It was a testament, a promise, and he was now its sworn protector. The battle for the Turner legacy had officially begun. The weight of those whispered words and lingering stares pressed down on Jake as he returned to the desolate ranch house. He knew he needed to understand the true nature of the animosity simmering against his family, to peel back the layers of history that had led to such entrenched resentment. That evening, as the desert sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Jake began his meticulous search through the dusty, neglected house. He started with his father's study, a room he remembered being forbidden as a child, now a mausoleum of forgotten memories. Underneath a thick layer of dust on a mahogany desk, he found a locked drawer. A moment of hesitation, then a determined pry with a rusted screwdriver from his saddlebag, and the mechanism gave way with a groan. Inside, a treasure trove of forgotten history awaited him. Old ledgers, their pages brittle and yellowed, detailed land transactions from decades past, revealing intricate feuds over water rights and grazing boundaries. There were legal documents, court orders, and handwritten letters, some formal, some filled with venom, all pointing to a long, bitter dispute with a neighboring ranching family, the McCreas. This was the source, he realized, the taproot of the animosity. Elias Turner had been fiercely protective of his land and resources, often to the point of outright aggression, and his dealings had left a trail of bruised egos and legitimate grievances. Among the official documents, Jake discovered a series of personal journals, bound in worn leather. His father's handwriting, usually precise and firm, grew looser, more reflective in these private entries. Jake began to read, his fingers tracing the faded ink. It wasn't the stoic, unyielding man he remembered, the father who had always seemed distant and unapproachable. Here, in these pages, was a glimpse into Elias Turner's anxieties, his triumphs, and his deep-seated fears for the ranch's future. He wrote of the harshness of the land, the constant battle against drought and disease, and the relentless pressure from larger corporations trying to buy out smaller family operations. He also wrote of his loneliness after Jake's mother passed, a vulnerability Jake had never witnessed. There were entries, too, that spoke of regret, particularly concerning his neighbors. Elias chronicled instances where his stubbornness had led to unnecessary conflict, where pride had overshadowed practicality. He lamented a specific incident involving a shared water well with the Macrias, an argument that had escalated into violence and left a lasting scar on both families. These revelations chipped away at Jake's preconceived notions of his father as an infallible, almost monolithic figure. Elias was human, flawed, and deeply burdened by the weight of his responsibilities. He was a man fighting to preserve a way of life, even if he often chose the wrong battles or fought them with too much ferocity. Throughout this process of discovery, the old horse, Comanche, remained a steadfast, silent presence. He would often stand near the open study window, his ears swiveling, as if listening to the rustle of the old papers, to the quiet exclamations Jake sometimes made. Sometimes Jake would pause, lean against the window frame, and stroke Comanche's soft muzzle. In those moments, he felt as if the horse was a living archive, holding its own memories of Elias, of the ranch in its heyday, of the arguments and the laughter. Comanche would sigh, a deep, resonant sound, and Jake felt a profound connection, an understanding that transcended words. It was as if the horse was confirming the stories, bearing witness to the truth contained within those brittle pages. The animal wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a bridge connecting Jake to his father's complex legacy. This profound bond solidified his resolve. The past was complex, but it was his past, and this ranch, with all its secrets and burdens, was his heritage. He knew now that understanding the why behind the animosity was the first step toward reclaiming not just the land, but his family's name. The fragile peace Jake had cultivated was shattered by a swift, brutal escalation. The antagonists, evidently unnerved by his persistence and the subtle shifts in community sentiment, intensified their campaign to drive him out. First, a section of his vital irrigation ditch was deliberately sabotaged overnight, sending precious water flooding uselessly into the arid soil. Then a series of anonymous threats began appearing, crudely scrawled on the ranch gates, warning him to leave or face dire consequences. One terrifying night, a small controlled brush fire erupted near the stables, dangerously close to where Comanche slept, its acrid smoke filling the air. Jake, roused by the frantic whinnying of the horse, battled the flames, a cold terror gripping his heart as he realized the sheer maliciousness behind these attacks. Each act of vandalism and intimidation chipped away at his resources and tested his spirit. The initial repairs to the ranch were painstakingly slow, and these new incidents felt like a constant regression. He spent sleepless nights patrolling the perimeter, shotgun in hand, the shadows playing tricks on his eyes. The solitude that had once offered a measure of peace now felt like a suffocating blanket, amplifying his vulnerability. He faced personal danger head-on, confronting shadowy figures twice in the darkness, exchanging terse, menacing words before they melted back into the night. He was bruised, exhausted, and pushed to his physical and emotional limits, the ghost of his past betrayals whispering doubts into his ear. Was he truly strong enough to withstand this relentless assault? Had he been foolish to believe he could reclaim this legacy? The sheer weight of the responsibility and the constant threat pressed down on him, threatening to crush his resolve. Yet, precisely when he felt most isolated, glimmers of unexpected support began to emerge from the community. Old Man Johnson, a grizzled rancher who had been a taciturn neighbor for decades, appeared one morning with a battered old tractor, offering to help with the irrigation ditch. Elias was stubborn, but he was fair, Johnson grumbled, refusing payment. And this ain't how things are done here. His gruff kindness was a lifeline. Soon after, Maria, the proprietor of the small general store in town, started quietly leaving extra provisions on his tab, along with a note telling him to keep his chin up. She'd heard talk, she said, and not all of it bad. These small gestures, born out of a quiet sense of justice and a deep-seated disapproval of the Macreas's heavy-handed tactics, were like vital drops of water in his parched existence. Jake also found an unlikely ally in young Billy, Elias's former stable hand, now grown into a quiet, observant man. Billy, who had always kept to himself, approached Jake one afternoon while he was mending a fence. He spoke softly, recounting observations of suspicious activities around the Macrea property, small details that Jake's isolated perspective had missed. Billy knew the land, knew the local gossip, and most importantly, he had a fierce, unspoken loyalty to the Turner Ranch, a loyalty cultivated during his years working for Elias. His knowledge and willingness to share information became invaluable, providing Jake with crucial insights into his adversary's movements and intentions. These unexpected allies, though few, rekindled a spark of hope within Jake. He wasn't entirely alone, and their belief in him, albeit cautiously expressed, fortified his spirit. He knew now that fighting for his inheritance was not just about his father's legacy. It was about protecting a way of life, and with these newfound supporters, he felt a renewed sense of purpose to stand his ground against the escalating aggression. He would not be driven away. The tension, a low hum beneath the surface of the New Mexico landscape, finally erupted. It began subtly, a series of increasingly brazen acts of sabotage on the ranch. First, a section of fence along the northern boundary, painstakingly repaired by Jake, was found deliberately cut, allowing a small herd of stray cattle to wander onto the newly seeded pasture. Then, the water pump for the main well, vital for the survival of the remaining livestock and the nascent garden, mysteriously malfunctioned, its intricate parts clearly tampered with. These incidents, while frustrating, were not enough to break Jake's resolve. He worked tirelessly, driven by a renewed sense of purpose, to mitigate the damage, his cowboy skills proving invaluable. But then came the fire. It started just after midnight, a sinister orange glow against the black canvas of the desert sky. A small storage shed holding vital equipment and some of Elias's old tools was fully engulfed. Jake awoke to the frantic whinnying of Comanche, a sound of desperate urgency that cut through the night. The old horse, usually so calm, was pacing wildly in his corral, his eyes wide with fear, nostrils flaring towards the blaze. Jake scrambled out of bed, adrenaline coursing through him, and ran towards the light, the heat already palpable on his face. He fought the fire with every resource he had: buckets of water, a small sputtering fire extinguisher, a heavy canvas tarp, but it was too late. By the time the local volunteer fire department arrived, the shed was a charred ruin, and the acrid smell of smoke hung heavy in the air, a pungent reminder of malicious intent. This wasn't just petty vandalism, it was a deliberate act of destruction, an open declaration of war. The ranch, Jake's inheritance, his burgeoning hope, was under direct attack. His father's legacy, which he was just beginning to understand and cherish, felt like it was slipping through his fingers. He stood amidst the smoldering debris, his chest heavy with grief and a cold, hard anger. He knew who was behind it: the McCrees. The escalation was undeniable, terrifying. This wasn't about land disputes anymore. It was personal, vindictive. Comanche, after being calmed, nudged Jake's shoulder gently. There was an intelligence in the horse's gaze, a knowing stillness that both comforted and unsettled him. It was as if Comanche understood the depth of the betrayal, the ruthless cruelty of the attack. Later that morning, as Jake surveyed the damage, a chilling discovery was made. Tucked beneath a scorched timber, almost overlooked, was a crudely fashioned symbol, a stylized M carved into a piece of petrified wood. It was an unmistakable message, a taunt left behind by the McCreas, confirming Jake's suspicions and erasing any lingering doubt about who his enemies truly were. This was no longer a battle of wills. It was a fight for survival, for the very soul of the ranch. The ranch was in immediate peril, its future hanging by a thread. Without the stored equipment, the crucial spring planting would be significantly delayed, jeopardizing the ranch's financial recovery. Jake felt a gnawing fear, a resurgence of the despair he thought he had left behind on the dusty roads. This wasn't just about property. It was about his identity, his connection to his father, and the possibility of building a new life. He looked at Comanche, standing nearby, his head bowed almost in sorrow. The horse suddenly lifted his head, whinnied sharply, and stared intently towards the back acreage, a wild, untamed corner of the ranch bordering the McCrea property. It was an unusual, almost warning cry, a sound Jake had never heard from the old horse before, filled with an unsettling prescience. Comanche then took a few agitated steps, pushing against his corral gate with an insistent urgency. Jake followed the horse's unwavering gaze, a prickle of unease turning into a full-blown alarm. The air itself seemed to vibrate with an unseen danger. The climax had truly begun. He instinctively knew that whatever came next, Comanche held a pivotal piece of the puzzle, a silent guide through the impending storm. The old horse was trying to tell him something, to show him the path through the immediate peril. Jake trusted that intuition. The weight of Elias's journals, heavy with untold stories and hidden truths, settled firmly in Jake's gut, transforming the abstract bitterness of old rivalries into a tangible, actionable plan. Discovering his father's detailed accounts of the Macreas's underhanded tactics regarding the disputed water rights, particularly a fraudulent claim they'd filed years ago to divert a crucial spring, galvanized him. This wasn't just about land, it was about justice. The old man, for all his gruffness, had meticulously documented everything, hoping one day someone would pick up his fight. This detailed evidence, carefully hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his father's study, was the turning point. It wasn't just a revelation. It was an arsenal. Jake now held the proof needed to challenge the Macreas's long-established power, to dismantle their carefully constructed narrative of victimhood and reclaim what was rightfully his family's. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Jake's approach shifted from defensive to strategic. He reread the entries, cross-referencing dates and specific events with dusty county records he'd found in the ranch's neglected office. The pattern of deceit became alarmingly clear, painting a picture of calculated aggression from the Macreas, preying on Elias's proud but often isolated nature. His father had made mistakes, yes, but he had also been strategically undermined. The final piece of the puzzle clicked when Jake found an unsealed envelope containing a surveyor's report, commissioned by Elias shortly before his death, explicitly detailing the original property lines and the illegal diversion point of the spring. It was the smoking gun. That evening, a sense of quiet determination replaced the gnawing despair that had plagued him for so long. He wasn't just a homeless cowboy anymore. He was an inheritor, a protector, and a son seeking redemption for his father's legacy. He spent hours studying topographic maps, identifying key landmarks mentioned in the surveyor's report. His cowboy skills, honed over decades of working the land, suddenly felt sharper, more focused. He understood the nuances of terrain, the flow of water, the subtle shifts that indicated human interference. This wasn't just dusty paperwork. It was the land speaking to him, revealing its scars. The immediate threat from the Macreas intensified shortly after Jake began openly repairing fences near the disputed spring. A group of their hired hands, menacing and heavily armed, approached him, issuing veiled threats and demanding he cease operations. "This here's Macrea land, Turner," one of them sneered. "Always has been, always will be." But Jake, no longer the broken man they had encountered previously, met their gaze unflinchingly. He held up the rolled-up surveyor's report, its official seal prominent. "This here says otherwise," he stated, his voice calm but resolute. "And I've got a whole lot more where this came from, proving every gallon of water you've diverted for the last 15 years was stolen." The hired hands exchanged uneasy glances. They were used to bullying, not to being confronted with irrefutable evidence. Jake, anticipating their move, had already strategically placed cameras around the spring, discreetly monitoring any further attempts at sabotage or intimidation. He used his old phone, now miraculously connected to a weak signal, to send a detailed email to the county sheriff, attaching copies of the surveyor's report and excerpts from his father's journals. He even included time-stamped footage from his new cameras, capturing the Macrea hand's recent trespass and threats. This direct, proactive confrontation, backed by solid evidence and a modern-day record, disarmed them in a way pure force never could. The balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The immediate threat evaporated like desert mist under the midday sun. The sheriff, a man of quiet integrity, who had long suspected the Macreas's questionable practices but lacked concrete proof, acted swiftly. Confronted with Jake's irrefutable evidence, the surveyor's report, Elias's detailed journals, and the damning camera footage, the McCrees found their carefully cultivated facade crumbling. A cease and desist order was issued, followed by legal proceedings initiated by the county for water theft and land encroachment. News traveled fast in the rural community, and the arrogant, entitled air that typically surrounded the McCreas dissipated. Their hired thugs were disbanded, their bluster replaced by sullen acquiescence under the watchful eye of the law. Jake had not sought revenge, but justice, and it was being served. The resolution of this immediate conflict brought a palpable shift in the community's perception. Where once there was wary suspicion, now an undercurrent of respect began to flow. Old Man Hemlock, who ran the general store and had always offered Jake a kind word, was the first to openly commend him. "Figured you had some fight in you, son," he'd grumbled, a rare smile creasing his weathered face. Elias was a stubborn mule, but he was honest. Glad to see some of that spirit lives on. Other ranchers, some of whom had secretly suffered from the McCreas' territorial aggressions themselves, started offering small gestures of support, a loan of equipment, a tip on good feed, a friendly wave. They saw not just Elias's son, but a man who stood up for what was right against powerful odds. The ranch, once a symbol of abandonment and decline, was slowly becoming a beacon of resilience, championed by a cowboy who refused to be broken. Jake, watching the McCreas' illegal diversion pipes being dismantled by a county work crew, finally allowed himself a moment of genuine relief. The bitterness he had carried for so long, a heavy weight born of betrayal and loss, began to ease. He found himself thinking less of the pain his father's actions had caused, and more of the quiet dignity. Encoded in Elias's journals, the unwavering love for the land and the fierce protectiveness of his legacy. His father's mistakes, Jake realized, were born of a different kind of desperation, a stubborn pride that had sometimes blinded him, but never fully extinguished his moral compass. The deeper Jake delved into the ranch's history, the more he understood that Elias had fought his own battles, not always perfectly, but with an underlying commitment to his home. The emotional healing was a slow, deliberate process, much like mending fences or repairing a neglected barn. Each day, as Jake worked the land, he felt closer to Elias. He found an old, faded photograph tucked inside a saddlebag in the tack room. A younger Elias, smiling, astride a sturdy bay horse that was unmistakably a younger version of Pilgrim. A small, almost imperceptible ache in Jake's chest began to soften. He saw his father not just as the distant, often critical figure of his youth, but as a man who had loved this land with every fiber of his being, a man who, despite his flaws, had instilled in Jake the very resilience now saving their home. The ranch wasn't just a financial inheritance, it was an emotional one, a testament to a complicated love and an enduring legacy. The old horse, Pilgrim, often stood watching Jake work, his wisdom-filled eyes a silent testament to the long journey they had both undertaken. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared sense of purpose in honoring the past while building a new future. With the immediate threat of the McCreas neutralized, not through violence, but through the irref. The sun, a fiery orb setting over the meticulously restored Turner Ranch, cast long, golden shadows across acres of vibrant, reseeded pastures. Jake stood on the freshly painted porch of the homestead, the familiar creak of the planks under his boots a comforting rhythm. The air, once thick with the dust of neglect and the tension of conflict, now carried the sweet scent of new growth and the faint, contented lowing of cattle. He surveyed his domain, a landscape transformed, not just by his hands, but by the renewed spirit that now permeated every fence post and every gabled roof. The Macreas, shamed by the irrefutable evidence Jake had presented, combined with the county's swift intervention, had been forced to concede. They faced fines for water diversion and land encroachment, their bullying tactics finally crumbling under the weight of truth and modern law. Their influence, once a heavy cloud over the valley, had dissipated, replaced by a quiet resentment that no longer held any power. The community's perception of Jake had undergone a profound metamorphosis. The wary glances had given way to nods of respect, then to genuine smiles and offers of help. Neighbors, once distant, now shared coffee on his porch, discussing cattle prices and rainfall, acknowledging him not just as Elias Turner's son, but as Jake, the man who brought the Turner Ranch back to life. He had become an integral, respected part of the valley once more, his cowboy skills respected, his quiet tenacity admired. The ranch, thriving under his careful stewardship, was a testament to resilience, a beacon of what hard work and unwavering resolve could achieve. Elias's memory, once a source of complicated pain, now brought a gentle ache of understanding and pride. Jake had found a faded photograph in an old trunk showing his father, younger and full of life, standing proudly beside a newly constructed fence, a mirror image of the one Jake had just rebuilt. He understood now that Elias's mistakes were born of fierce independence and a deep love for this land, even if he sometimes stumbled in expressing it. Jake felt a profound connection to his father, a spiritual partnership spanning generations, woven into the very fabric of the ranch. He saw Elias in the sturdy beams of the barn, in the whispering cottonwoods along the creek, and in the enduring spirit of the land itself. His hand instinctively went to the aging leather halter hanging near the door, a relic of a bond that transcended words. The old horse, his father's loyal companion, had lived out its final days in a verdant paddock overlooking the entire valley, a place of peace and honor. It had gone quietly, surrounded by the comfort of the land it loved, its last breath a soft sigh in the morning air. Its passing, though tinged with sadness, felt less like an ending and more like a gentle transition, a final, poignant gift. The horse had been the catalyst, the silent guide, the living link to a past Jake needed to understand to build his future. Its steady presence had steadied him, its unwavering loyalty a constant reminder of what endured. Jake often swore he still felt the brush of its soft muzzle against his hand, a phantom touch of comfort and wisdom. The horse had indeed completed its journey, leaving behind a legacy of quiet strength that continued to shape Jake's new life. Standing there on his fully restored ranch, Jake Turner, once a lost soul betrayed by the world, was now a man at peace, replete with a quiet dignity he hadn't known was possible. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, carrying the scent of pine and rich earth, a symphony of renewal. He had faced destitution, treachery, and the ghosts of his past, emerging not unscathed, but undeniably whole. His hands, once calloused from bare survival, were now the hands of a steward, a builder, a rancher. This ranch, this home, was more than just $5 million. It was a testament to enduring spirit, the power of legacy, and the unwavering promise of the American West to those brave enough to claim their place within it. It was a story of a lost cowboy, found again, and the land that called him home. If you were moved by J.